San Francisco, California, November. The fog rolled in from the Pacific like a living thing, swallowing the golden towers of the financial district and creeping through the manicured streets of Pacific Heights. On this particular Tuesday evening, as the city's elite gathered in penthouses and private clubs, none could have imagined that within 3 months one of their own would be dead, murdered in a plot so cold and calculated that it would haunt the Bay Area for decades to come. In the gleaming 42nd floor of the Transamerica Pyramid, Alexandra Benedetti stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the fog transform the city below into an impressionist painting. At 28, she was the youngest partner at Hartwell & Associates, the most prestigious interior design firm on the West Coast. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman of striking beauty, olive skin that spoke of her Italian heritage, dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and eyes the color of espresso that seemed to see everything. Those eyes had served her well in her climb from the working-class neighborhoods of North Beach to the rarefied air of San Francisco society. The daughter of a longshoreman and a seamstress, Alexandra had learned early that in a city built on gold rush dreams, image was everything. Her parents, Marco and Lucia Benedetti, had sacrificed everything to send her to the exclusive Sacred Heart Academy, where she'd rubbed shoulders with the daughters of tech moguls and old California money. But it was her marriage to Richard Whitmore III that had truly opened the doors to San Francisco's inner circle. The elevator chimed softly behind her, and Alexandra turned to see her assistant Janet approaching with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Whitmore, your husband called again. He wants to know when you'll be home for dinner." Alexandra's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tell him I'll be working late, again." Janet hesitated. He seemed insistent. "Said something about the Morrison account and how you're embarrassing him by staying out so late." "The Morrison account is worth $2 million to this firm, Janet. If Richard can't understand that my work is important, that's his problem." As Janet retreated, Alexandra turned back to the window. 5 years of marriage to Richard Whitmore III, heir to a shipping fortune that dated back to the gold rush, had given her everything she'd thought she wanted. The Pacific Heights mansion, the country club memberships, the charity board positions. But somewhere along the way, the golden cage had begun to feel more like a prison. Richard's true nature had emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. The charming Harvard MBA, who'd swept her off her feet at a gallery opening, had gradually revealed himself to be controlling, paranoid, and increasingly unstable. He monitored her spending with the intensity of an accountant, despite having a net worth in the hundreds of millions. He questioned her friendships, particularly with other men, and lately he'd begun talking about starting a family, his way of ensuring she'd have no choice but to abandon her career. The phone on her desk buzzed. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says his name is Vincent Torres, and it's regarding the Morrison project." Alexandra frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the Morrison account was nearly complete. "Send him in." The man who walked through her office door was not what she'd expected. Vincent Torres was perhaps 45, with graying temples and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room. He wore an expensive suit, but something about his posture suggested he was more comfortable in jeans and a work shirt. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for seeing me without an appointment." His voice carried a slight accent that might have been Spanish or Portuguese. "I apologize for the late hour, but I'm here on behalf of someone who values discretion." "I'm sorry, Mr. Torres, but I'm not taking on new clients at the moment. Perhaps you could schedule something with my assistant for next week." Torres smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. It concerns your husband." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Alexandra felt her pulse quicken, but years of navigating high society politics had taught her to keep her expression neutral. "I'm afraid I don't understand what my husband has to do with your design needs, Mr. Torres." "Design?" Torres laughed softly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not here about interior design. I'm here because your husband has made certain inquiries. Inquiries about permanent solutions to what he considers marital problems. The blood seemed to drain from Alexandra's face. She moved to her desk, partly for support and partly to put a barrier between herself and this strange man. I think you should leave. Now. Your husband contacted associates of mine 3 weeks ago. He was very specific about his requirements. He wanted someone who could make his wife's death look like a random crime. A robbery gone wrong, perhaps, or a carjacking in the wrong neighborhood. Alexandra's hand moved toward the phone, but Torres held up a palm. I'm not here to threaten you, Mrs. Whitmore. Quite the opposite. The people your husband approached, they have certain ethical standards. They don't take contracts on innocent people, especially women. But they thought you should know what your husband is planning. You're lying. But even as she said it, Alexandra felt the truth of it, settling in her stomach like a cold stone. Richard's increasing paranoia, his questions about her schedule, his insistence that she come home early every night, the way he'd been pushing her to update her will, claiming it was just good financial planning. Torres reached into his jacket, moving slowly to show he meant no harm, and withdrew a small recording device. Your husband was quite explicit about his requirements. Would you like to hear? Alexandra stared at the device as if it were a snake. Part of her wanted to smash it, to pretend this conversation had never happened, but a larger part, the part that had clawed its way up from North Beach through sheer determination, needed to know the truth. Play it. Richard's voice filled the office, tinny but unmistakable. The problem is that she's become completely unreasonable. Won't listen to reason about quitting that ridiculous job. Won't discuss children. Spends money like water on her little design projects. Frankly, I think she's lost sight of what's important in a marriage. Another voice, gravelly and unfamiliar. Divorce is always an option, Mr. Whitmore. Richard's bitter laugh. Have you seen what divorce costs these days? Especially when the wife has her own income and thinks she's entitled to half of everything. No, I need a more permanent solution. Something that would look like random violence. San Francisco has plenty of that, doesn't it? Alexandra sank into her chair, the room spinning slightly. Torres stopped the recording and slipped it back into his jacket. There's more, but I think you get the idea. Your husband offered my associates $500,000 for your murder, Mrs. Whitmore. He's not a patient man. When they turned him down, he made it clear he would find someone else. Why are you telling me this? What do you want? Nothing from you. Consider it a professional courtesy. My associates believe that people should have a chance to protect themselves. Torres moved toward the door, then paused. Mrs. Whitmore, if I were you, I'd be very careful about my routines. Don't go anywhere alone, especially at night. And I'd consider that your husband might try to make it look like you simply disappeared. A woman who worked late, walking to her car in an empty parking garage. These things happen in the city. After he left, Alexandra sat in her office as the fog thickened outside her windows, and the building grew quiet around her. Her hands shook as she replayed every conversation she'd had with Richard over the past month, looking for signs she'd missed. The way he'd asked about her schedule with such apparent casualness, his sudden interest in whether she carried pepper spray, his suggestion that she start parking in the garage beneath their building instead of on the street, for safety, he'd said. Her phone buzzed again. Janet had gone home hours ago, so the building's security system was routing calls directly to her. Alexandra, where the hell are you? Richard's voice was sharp with irritation. You were supposed to be home 2 hours ago. The Pemberton dinner is tomorrow night, and we need to discuss what you're wearing. You can't keep embarrassing me with these late nights. I'm finishing up the Morrison presentation. I'll be home soon. The Morrison account again. Alexandra, I'm beginning to think you care more about arranging other people's furniture than you do about our marriage. The irony of his words, given what she'd just learned, made her stomach lurch. I'll be home in an hour, Richard. See that you are. And Alexandra, drive carefully. The fog is getting thick, and there have been a lot of break-ins in the financial district lately. A woman alone at night? Well, you never know what might happen. The line went dead. Alexandra stared at the phone for a long moment, then gathered her purse and coat with trembling hands. As she waited for the elevator, she caught her reflection in the polished brass doors. She looked pale, shaken, vulnerable. But Alexandra Benedetti Whitmore hadn't climbed from North Beach to Pacific Heights by being vulnerable. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, she began to plan. If Richard wanted to play games with her life, he was about to discover that his wife was far more formidable than he'd imagined. The garage was dimly lit, filled with the luxury cars of the building's other late-working tenants. Alexandra's heels echoed off the concrete as she walked toward her silver BMW, keys ready in her hand. She'd always prided herself on being aware of her surroundings, but tonight every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. As she reached her car, she noticed a white van parked in the visitor section, its engine running. Through the tinted windshield, she could make out the silhouette of a single occupant. The van had been there when she'd arrived that morning, which was unusual. Visitor parking was limited to 4 hours. Alexandra got into her car quickly, locking the doors immediately. As she started the engine, she watched the van in her rearview mirror. When she backed out of her space, the van's headlights came on. Heart-pounding, she drove toward the garage exit, taking a deliberately circuitous route between the concrete pillars. The van followed, maintaining a careful distance. At the exit, Alexandra paused to validate her parking ticket, watching as the van pulled up behind her. The attendant, an elderly Asian man she'd known for 3 years, leaned down to her window. "Working late again, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Henry, that van behind me, have you seen it before?" Henry glanced back, squinting in the fluorescent light. "White van? Been here all day. Driver paid for 24-hour parking, which is unusual. Cash payment too." Alexandra's blood ran cold. What did the driver look like? Hard to say. Big guy, wearing a baseball cap, kept it pulled down low, didn't make eye contact. The van's engine revved impatiently behind her. Alexandra thanked Henry and drove out onto Montgomery Street, turning left toward Pacific Heights. The van followed. At the first traffic light, Alexandra fumbled for her cell phone and dialed 9. "San Francisco Police, what's your emergency? This is Alexandra Whitmore. I think I'm being followed. I'm driving north on Montgomery Street in a silver BMW, and there's a white van behind me that's been tailing me since I left the financial district. Are you in immediate danger, ma'am?" Alexandra looked in her rearview mirror. The van was maintaining its distance, following her through the intersection as the light turned green. "I don't know. Maybe. Can you send a patrol car?" "Ma'am, unless the van is threatening you directly or trying to force you off the road, following someone isn't necessarily a crime. Are you sure this vehicle is actually pursuing you?" The van followed her through 3 more turns, each one taking her further from her normal route home. Alexandra's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. "Yes, I'm sure. Listen, there are circumstances. My husband may have hired someone to hurt me. Ma'am, if you believe your life is in danger, I can dispatch a unit to escort you home." "Where are you headed?" Alexandra was about to give her address when a terrible thought occurred to her. What if Richard was waiting at home? What if this was all part of his plan? Drive her to panic, make her come running home into a trap. "Actually, I'd like to go to the police station. The Northern District Station on Fillmore Street." "Copy that. We'll have a unit meet you there." As Alexandra changed course toward the police station, she noticed something that made her blood freeze. The van wasn't following her anymore. It had peeled off when she'd mentioned the police station, almost as if the driver had been listening to her phone call. She pulled into the police station parking lot with shaking hands, immediately spotting the black and white patrol car that was waiting for her. 2 officers approached as she got out of her car, a tall African-American man and a shorter white woman, both looking alert and professional. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Officer Jenkins. This is Officer Martinez. You reported being followed." Alexandra explained about the van, about Vincent Torres's visit, about Richard's increasing controlling behavior. As she spoke, she watched the officer's expressions shift from routine concern to sharp attention. "Mrs. Whitmore," Officer Martinez said carefully, "these are very serious allegations. Do you have any physical evidence of what this Torres fellow told you? He played me a recording. Richard's voice, talking about hiring someone to kill me. Do you have a copy of this recording?" Alexandra's heart sank. No. Torres kept it. The officers exchanged glances. "Mrs. Whitmore, we'd like to help you, but without evidence, it's difficult to proceed. Has your husband ever physically threatened you? Any documented instances of domestic violence?" "No, nothing like that. Richard's too smart for anything so obvious." Officer Jenkins pulled out a notepad. "Tell us about your husband's behavior lately. Anything unusual, anything that might corroborate what this Torres person told you." For the next hour, Alexandra found herself recounting the slow deterioration of her marriage. Richard's questions about her schedule, his financial control, his pressure for her to quit her job and have children. As she spoke, she realized how insidious it had all been, a gradual tightening of control that had seemed almost normal until viewed from the outside. "Mrs. Whitmore," Officer Martinez said finally, "do you have somewhere safe you can stay tonight? Family, friends?" Alexandra considered her options. Her parents lived in a tiny apartment in North Beach. Bringing danger to their doorstep was unthinkable. Her closest friend from work, Margaret, lived in Marin County, but involving her seemed unfair and potentially dangerous. "I could get a hotel room. That might be wise. And Mrs. Whitmore, don't go home alone. If you need to retrieve belongings, call us and we'll send an officer with you." As Alexandra drove toward the downtown Fairmont Hotel, her mind raced through the implications of what had happened. If Vincent Torres was telling the truth, her husband was actively planning her murder. If he was lying, well, she couldn't think of any reason why a stranger would invent such an elaborate story. The hotel's valet took her car, and Alexandra checked in under her maiden name, paying cash for a suite on the 14th floor. Once inside, she double-locked the door and sat on the bed, finally allowing herself to fully absorb what had happened. Her phone rang, and Richard's name appeared on the display. Alexandra stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Alexandra, where are you? I've been calling for hours. I had to work late, and then I got a drink with a client. I'm sorry, I should have called." "A client? Which client?" Richard's voice had an edge she'd never noticed before, or maybe she'd just never allowed herself to hear it. "The Morrison Project. We had some last-minute changes to discuss. It's after midnight. Alexandra, what kind of client meets that late? The kind that pays us $2 million. Richard, I'm exhausted. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" There was a pause. "Where are you? You don't sound like you're at home." Alexandra's pulse quickened. "I'm in the bathroom. Richard, I really need to get some sleep." "Funny thing, Alexandra, I'm standing in our bathroom right now, and you're definitely not here." The line went dead. Alexandra stared at the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. How much did Richard know? Had he been tracking her somehow? She thought about the white van, the way it had disappeared when she'd mentioned the police station. She was reaching for the hotel phone to call the police, when her cell phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your husband is on his way to the Fairmont. He knows which room you're in. Trust no one. Go to the stairwell now. Take nothing with you. Someone will contact you tomorrow with instructions." Alexandra stared at the message, her mind spinning. How could Richard know where she was? How could this unknown person know what Richard was doing? A soft ding from the hallway indicated that the elevator had arrived on her floor. Without stopping to think, Alexandra grabbed her purse and ran for the stairwell door at the far end of the corridor. As she slipped through it, she heard her room number being called softly, Richard's voice accompanied by another man's deeper tones. Her husband had brought help. Alexandra ran down 14 flights of stairs in heels, her breathing ragged and her mind reeling. Whatever game she'd been unknowingly playing, the stakes had just increased exponentially. As she emerged into the hotel's loading dock area, she realized that her life as Alexandra Whitmore was over. Whatever came next, she would have to become someone else entirely. Behind her, she could hear footsteps in the stairwell, coming fast. The loading dock of the Fairmont Hotel was a maze of shadows and industrial machinery, illuminated only by the sickly yellow glow of sodium vapor lights. Alexandra pressed herself against a concrete pillar, her breath coming in sharp gasps that seemed to echo off the walls like gunshots. Her designer heels were a liability now. She slipped them off and held them in one hand, feeling the cold concrete beneath her stockinged feet. Somewhere above her, footsteps thundered down the stairwell. Richard's voice carried through the steel door, muffled but unmistakably furious. "She's not in the room. Check the other floor." "What about the garage?" The second voice was gravelly, unfamiliar, professional. "Already covered. Marcus is watching the exits. She's trapped in here somewhere." Alexandra's mind raced. Marcus. Richard had brought at least 2 men with him. This wasn't the desperate act of a jealous husband. This was a coordinated operation. A delivery truck rumbled into the loading dock, its headlights sweeping across the concrete and forcing Alexandra deeper into the shadows. The driver, a heavy-set man in a Giants baseball cap, climbed down from the cab and began unloading boxes of what looked like kitchen supplies. "Excuse me," Alexandra whispered, approaching him carefully. "I need help. Some men are after me." The man's hand moved to something under his jacket, and Alexandra realized with horror that he wasn't a delivery driver at all. The truck was part of the trap. She ran. The loading dock opened onto a narrow alley that connected to Grant Avenue in Chinatown. Alexandra sprinted barefoot across the wet pavement, her heart hammering as she heard shouts behind her. The fake delivery driver was speaking into a radio, coordinating with others. How many people had Richard hired? How long had he been planning this? Grant Avenue at midnight was a different world from the touristy daytime bustle. Neon signs in Chinese characters cast red and blue shadows on empty sidewalks, and the few people still on the streets moved with purpose, avoiding eye contact. Alexandra ducked into the first open business she found, a narrow restaurant that smelled of ginger and star anise. The elderly Chinese woman behind the counter looked up from her newspaper, taking in Alexandra's disheveled appearance with sharp eyes. "We're closed," she said in accented English. "Please," Alexandra gasped. "Someone's trying to hurt me. Can I use your phone?" The woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the back of the restaurant. "Phone is in kitchen. You call police?" "I tried. It's complicated." As Alexandra dialed the number Vincent Torres had given her, she'd memorized it despite herself. She wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. But what choice did she have? The police couldn't protect her from something they couldn't prove. And Richard clearly had resources she'd never imagined. The phone rang once before Torres answered. "I was wondering when you'd call." "How did you know?" Alexandra's voice was barely a whisper. "About the hotel, about Richard coming after me." "Mrs. Whitmore, where are you right now?" "A restaurant in Chinatown." "Vincent, who are you really? How do you know all this?" "Stay where you are. I'll be there in 10 minutes. "And Mrs. Whitmore?" "Don't trust anyone else. Your husband has more friends than you realize." The line went dead. The restaurant owner appeared at Alexandra's elbow with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. "You sit," she commanded, guiding Alexandra to a small table in the back corner. "I am Mrs. Chen. You are in trouble with bad men." Alexandra nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "My husband wants to kill me." Mrs. Chen's expression darkened. "I know this story. In China, before I come here. My sister. She shook her head. Evil men think they own women like property. You have family to help. I thought I could trust the police, but Alexandra realized she didn't know how to explain the situation without sounding paranoid or delusional. Police sometimes cannot help until it is too late, Mrs. Chen said pragmatically. But you are smart to run. Smart women survive. Through the restaurant's front window, Alexandra saw a black sedan cruise slowly down Grant Avenue. The passenger window was down, and she caught a glimpse of Richard's profile as he scanned the sidewalks. There, she whispered to Mrs. Chen. That's him. Mrs. Chen moved to the window and watched the car disappear around a corner. He comes back. I turn off lights. Lock door. You hide in kitchen until your friend comes. 5 minutes later, as Alexandra crouched behind boxes of vegetables in the darkened restaurant, she heard the rumble of an engine outside. Car doors slammed, and footsteps approached the restaurant. Someone rattled the locked door handle, then moved on. When Vincent Torres finally arrived, he didn't come through the front door. Instead, Mrs. Chen led Alexandra through the kitchen to a back exit that opened onto a different alley. Torres was waiting there, leaning against a nondescript Honda Civic that looked nothing like the expensive car she would have expected. Smart thinking with the restaurant, he said, as they got into the car. Your husband's people have been watching the major hotels, the airport, your parents' place. They didn't think to check every business in Chinatown. As they drove through the empty streets, Alexandra studied Torres in the dashboard light. His expensive suit from earlier had been replaced by jeans and a leather jacket. He looked more natural this way, more dangerous. Who are you? She asked again. Torres was quiet for several blocks, navigating through the Mission District with the confidence of someone who knew every street. Finally, he spoke. 20 years ago, I was a cop in Los Angeles. Good cop, honest cop. Thought I was making a difference. Then I discovered that my partner was working for a man named Eduardo Restrepo, Colombian businessman who made his money in ways that weren't strictly legal. Drugs, among other things. My partner was feeding Restrepo information about police investigations. When I tried to report it, I found out that Restrepo owned half the department. My captain, my lieutenant, even the assistant district attorney. Torres turned into an industrial area near the bay, where warehouses stood like sleeping giants against the night sky. Long story short, I ended up with a choice. Take Restrepo's money and keep quiet, or have an unfortunate accident. I chose a third option. I disappeared. New identity, new life, new profession. What profession? Torres pulled into the parking lot of what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. I help people who can't get help from the system. People like you, Mrs. Whitmore. People whose problems are too complex for the police. Too dangerous for normal private investigators. He led her to a side door that opened with electronic keypad. Inside, the warehouse had been converted into something between an apartment and a command center. Banks of computer equipment lined one wall, while another held an impressive array of surveillance gear. A small kitchen and sleeping area occupied one corner, and the rest of the space was filled with filing cabinets and workbenches. Welcome to my office, Torres said, gesturing to a comfortable chair. Now, let's talk about your husband. Over the next hour, as Torres made coffee and Alexandra tried to process everything that had happened, the full scope of Richard's plan began to emerge. Your husband first contacted my former associates 6 months ago, Torres explained, spreading photographs across a table. These are surveillance shots from that meeting. The photos showed Richard sitting in what appeared to be an upscale restaurant, talking to two men Alexandra didn't recognize. One was the gravelly-voiced man she'd heard at the hotel, a thick-set individual with prison tattoos visible on his hands. The other was younger, cleaner, wearing an expensive suit. The older man is Marcus Webb, formerly of San Quentin. Armed robbery, assault, intimidation. He's what you might call a specialist in making problems disappear. The younger one is his nephew, Trevor Webb. college educated, no criminal record, but he's been laundering money for his uncle for the past 5 years. And they're the ones Richard hired to kill me. Eventually, yes. But initially, your husband was more subtle. He wanted to know if there was a way to drive you to suicide. Make it look like you couldn't handle the pressure of your career, your marriage, your social obligations. Alexandra felt sick. How? Torres pulled out another set of photos. These showed Alexandra herself, taken with a telephoto lens, getting coffee near her office, walking to her car, having lunch with clients. They've been watching you for months, Mrs. Whitmore, learning your routines, your vulnerabilities. Your husband told them about your history with anxiety, about the medication you took in college for panic attacks. I never told Richard about that. Alexandra's voice was barely a whisper. He hired a private investigator to dig into your background. Very thorough job. Your medical records, your academic records, interviews with your college roommates. He knew you'd been seeing a therapist during your senior year at Stanford. The violation of it was almost worse than the murder plot. Alexandra realized that her entire marriage had been built on Richard's calculated knowledge of her weaknesses. When the suicide plan seemed too unreliable, your husband moved to option 2, accidental death. Car accident, drowning, maybe a fall from your office building. But there were too many variables, too many ways it could go wrong. So he settled on murder. A straightforward hit, made to look like a robbery. You work late, walk to your car alone, get attacked by a mugger who panics and shoots you. Very tragic, very believable. Torres moved to his computer bank and brought up what appeared to be financial records. Your husband has already transferred the money to pay for it. $500,000 moved through 3 different shell companies and 2 offshore accounts. He's scheduled the hit for this Friday. This Friday? That's 3 days from now. The Morrison client dinner. You'll be working late to prepare for the presentation, then walking to your car alone around 11 p.m. Very predictable, very isolated. Alexandra stared at the screen, seeing her death planned out like a business transaction. But why are you helping me? What do you get out of this? Torres was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. 20 years ago, Eduardo Restrepo's wife found out about her husband's business activities. She was going to testify against him, help the FBI build a case. Restrepo hired someone to make her disappear. I tried to stop it, tried to warn her, but I was too late. What happened to her? Car accident on a mountain road. Very tragic, very believable. Her name was Isabella, and she was 26 years old, about your age when she died. The connection was clear now. Torres wasn't just helping Alexandra. He was trying to save the woman he couldn't save 20 years ago. So, what do we do? Alexandra asked. We turn the tables. Your husband thinks he's the hunter, but we're going to make him the prey. Torres moved to a wall map of San Francisco, marked with colored pins and string connections that looked like something from a detective movie. Richard has made one crucial mistake. He thinks you're helpless. He's seen you as a victim for so long that he can't imagine you fighting back. We're going to use that against him. How? We're going to let him think his plan is working. You're going to disappear completely. No credit cards, no cell phone, no contact with anyone from your old life. As far as the world knows, Alexandra Whitmore vanished without a trace. And then, Torres smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then we gather evidence. Real evidence, the kind that will hold up in court. Recording equipment, financial records, witness testimony. We're going to hand the police a case so airtight that even Richard's money can't buy his way out of it. What about Marcus Webb and his nephew? They'll keep looking for me. Let them look. While they're searching for a frightened woman who's running scared, we'll be building a case that will put all of them away for life. Alexandra felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just hope, but power. For the first time since her marriage, she wasn't reacting to Richard's moves. She was about to start making her own. What do I need to do? Torres handed her a manila envelope. New identity documents, driver's license, credit cards, social security number. As of tonight, you're Elena Rodriguez, a freelance graphic designer from Portland, who's new to the city. Alexandra. Elena studied the expertly forged documents. How did you get these so quickly? I've been preparing for this day since I first learned about your husband's plan. Elena Rodriguez has a complete background, employment history, rental history, even a few old friends who will vouch for her if anyone asks. What about my parents? My job? People will know I'm missing. Your parents will be told that you've gone into hiding because of threats from Richard. They'll be watched and protected until this is over. As for your job, well, Elena Rodriguez is about to apply for a position with a new interior design firm that specializes in, let's call it, discreet clientele. Torres led her to a closet filled with clothes in her size. Elena dresses differently than Alexandra. More casual, less expensive. She lives in a studio apartment in the Richmond district and drives a 10-year-old Toyota. As Alexandra changed clothes, she felt herself literally transforming. The designer suits and silk blouses were replaced by jeans and cotton sweaters. The expensive heels gave way to comfortable flats. Even her posture changed. Elena Rodriguez was confident but not commanding. Successful but not wealthy. There's one more thing, Torres said as she emerged from the changing area. Your husband's financial records show some interesting patterns. Large cash withdrawals over the past year, payments to shell companies that don't seem to exist, transfers to accounts in countries with very strict banking privacy laws. You think he's been planning this longer than 6 months? I think your husband has been preparing for various contingencies since shortly after you got married. The question is, what else has he been planning? Torres pulled up another set of financial records on his computer. 3 weeks ago, Richard increased his life insurance policy on you from $1 million to $5 million. But here's the interesting part. He also took out a substantial policy on himself. How substantial? $10 million. And the beneficiary isn't you, Mrs. Whitmore. It's a trust fund administered by Trevor Webb. The implications hit Alexandra like a physical blow. He's planning to disappear after I'm dead. Make it look like he's grieving. Maybe even make himself look like a victim. Or he's planning something even more elaborate. Think about it. If both you and Richard were to die in some tragic accident, Trevor Webb would control everything. The Whitmore shipping fortune, your life insurance money, all of it. You think Richard is planning to fake his own death? I think your husband is a very careful man who doesn't leave loose ends. And Mrs. Whitmore, or should I say, Elena, you were never meant to be the only victim. As the full scope of Richard's plan became clear, Alexandra felt a cold fury building inside her. Her husband hadn't just planned to kill her. He'd planned to steal her life, her identity, everything she'd worked for. Vincent, she said, and her voice carried a steel she'd never heard before, I want to destroy him. Not just stop him, not just send him to prison. I want to take everything he has, everything he values, and turn it against him. Torres studied her face in the dim light of the warehouse. That's a dangerous game, Elena. Once you start down that path, there's no going back. There's already no going back. My old life is over either way. But I can make sure Richard pays for what he's done. What did you have in mind? Elena moved to the window and looked out at the bay, where the lights of ships moved like stars across the black water. Richard thinks he knows me, thinks he understands how I'll react. But he's been wrong about me from the beginning. He saw a pretty socialite who needed his money and protection. He never saw the longshoreman's daughter who fought her way out of North Beach. She turned back to Torres, and in the computer light, her eyes held a dangerous gleam. You said Marcus Webb and his nephew are looking for a frightened woman who's running scared. What if they found something else instead? What if they found someone who was hunting them? Torres was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, His voice carried a warning. "Elena, these men are killers. They won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens them. Then we'd better make sure we eliminate them first." Outside the warehouse, the fog was lifting from the bay, and the first hints of dawn were visible on the eastern horizon. In a few hours, Richard would discover that his wife had vanished without a trace. The hunt would begin in earnest. But Alexandra Benedetti Whitmore was dead. In her place stood Elena Rodriguez, and Elena had plans that would make Richard Whitmore wish he'd never heard the name Benedetti. The game was about to change. The morning fog clung to San Francisco like a shroud as Elena Rodriguez walked through the financial district, her footsteps echoing off the empty sidewalks. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks since Alexandra Whitmore had vanished without a trace, and the city was just beginning to stir. But Elena wasn't here for the early morning solitude. She was here because Marcus Webb always got coffee from the same vendor at the same time every morning. Old habits, Vincent Torres had told her, were what got criminals caught. Elena positioned herself across the street from the coffee cart, hidden in the doorway of a closed boutique. She wore a long coat and sunglasses despite the overcast sky, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. To any observer, she was just another early commuter waiting for a bus. Marcus Webb emerged from the underground parking garage at exactly 6:17 a.m., just as Torres had predicted. The man was massive, easily 6'4", and built like a linebacker, but he moved with surprising grace for someone his size. His expensive suit couldn't quite hide the telltale bulge of a shoulder holster. As Webb approached the coffee cart, Elena pressed a small button on the device hidden in her coat pocket. Across the street, a high-resolution camera began recording everything. The usual Mr. Webb? The vendor, a thin Asian man with tired eyes, already had a large black coffee ready. "Yeah, thanks, Kim." Webb's voice carried the gravelly tone Elena remembered from the hotel. "How's business?" "Slow. People drinking fancy coffee from those chain stores now. Not good for small business." Webb handed over exact change. Elena noted that he was careful not to leave fingerprints on the bills and turned to walk back toward the garage. But instead of leaving immediately, he pulled out a cell phone and dialed a number. "It's me," he said into the phone. "Any word from our employer about the timeline?" Elena held her breath, straining to hear the conversation over the ambient city noise. "I don't care what his schedule looks like. The longer this drags out, the more chance something goes wrong. The cops are already asking questions about the missing wife." A pause as Webb listened to the voice on the other end. "Friday night is cutting it close. But if that's what he wants, yeah, I understand about the insurance investigation. 24 hours after we finish the job, we disappear. Mexico, like we discussed." Webb ended the call and walked back to the garage. Elena waited until she heard his car engine before emerging from her hiding place. She had what she needed, confirmation that Richard was moving ahead with his plan, despite her disappearance. More importantly, she now knew they were planning something for Friday night. An hour later, Elena sat in Torres's warehouse, reviewing the audio recording they'd captured. Torres had installed sophisticated listening equipment around several locations Webb and his nephew frequented, building a comprehensive picture of their operation. "Friday night," Torres repeated, adjusting the audio levels to eliminate background noise. "That's the night of the Pemberton charity auction. Half of San Francisco high society will be there, including Richard." Elena studied the photographs. Torres had spread across the table surveillance shots of her husband over the past 3 weeks. He's been playing the grieving spouse perfectly, attending social functions alone, accepting condolences, making sure everyone sees how devastated he is by my disappearance. The question is, what are they planning for Friday night? If you're already missing, what's the point of the operation? Elena had been wondering the same thing. According to the recordings they'd gathered, Marcus and Trevor Webb were still being paid to complete a job, but the parameters seemed to have changed. "Maybe they're not after me anymore," she said slowly. "Maybe they never were." Torres looked up from the audio equipment, What do you mean? What if the whole plan to kill me was just misdirection? What if Richard's real target was always someone else? Elena moved to the wall map, studying the pattern of surveillance locations Torres had marked. Most of them were centered around the financial district in Pacific Heights, but there were others scattered throughout the city. Vincent, show me the financial records again. The ones about Richard's life insurance policies. Torres pulled up the documents on his computer. $10 million policy on himself, $5 million on you. Both policies were purchased within the past year. And the beneficiaries? For yours, Richard is the primary beneficiary. For his, it's that trust fund administered by Trevor Webb. Elena stared at the screen, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. What if Richard isn't planning to fake his death? What if he's actually planning to die? That doesn't make sense. Why would he? Because he's not the one in control. Elena's voice carried a growing certainty. Think about it. Richard contacts criminals to kill his wife. But when they meet him, what do they see? A wealthy, paranoid man with access to millions of dollars and a detailed knowledge of how the family business operates. Torres's expression changed as he followed her logic. They see an opportunity. Marcus Webb isn't working for Richard. Richard is working for Marcus Webb. They convinced him that killing me was his idea, but really they were setting him up to be their next victim. The implications were staggering. Elena moved to Torres's computer and began pulling up financial records, cross-referencing dates and transactions. Look at this, she said, pointing to a series of transfers. Richard's been moving money out of his business accounts for months. Small amounts, spread across multiple transactions so they wouldn't trigger bank reporting requirements. Money laundering, Torres said grimly. They've been using Richard's legitimate business to clean their dirty money, and once they've taken what they need, they eliminate the evidence. Richard dies in a tragic accident, maybe the same one that was supposed to kill me. Trevor Webb, as the administrator of Richard's trust fund, gains control of everything. Elena felt a cold satisfaction at having unraveled the plot, but it was tempered by a growing urgency. If she was right, Richard was in immediate danger, and despite everything he'd done, she couldn't let him be murdered. We have to warn him, she said. Torres stared at her. Elena, this man tried to have you killed. He's been abusing you for years, controlling every aspect of your life. Why would you want to save him? Because if I let him die, I become just like them. And because... Elena paused, trying to find words for something she hadn't fully understood until this moment. Because the Richard who married me, the man I fell in love with, I think he was already dead. I think Marcus Webb and his people have been controlling him for longer than any of us realized. Torres was quiet for a long moment. You think they've been blackmailing him? I think they've been grooming him, building him up, making him dependent on them, slowly taking control of his business and his life. When I started becoming too independent, too much of a threat to their operation, they convinced him that killing me was the solution to his problems. Elena pulled up another set of financial records, these showing Richard's personal accounts. Look at this pattern. Large deposits from unknown sources, followed immediately by transfers to offshore accounts. Richard's been laundering money for them for at least 2 years, and now they don't need him anymore. Worse than that, now he's a liability. He knows too much about their operation, and he's starting to crack under the pressure. They need to eliminate him before he talks to the police or does something else unpredictable. Torres moved to his equipment rack and began selecting devices. If we're going to stop this, we need evidence. Real evidence that will hold up in court. What kind of evidence? We need to record them admitting to the plan. We need financial records that can't be dismissed as circumstantial. And we need to catch them in the act. Elena felt her pulse quicken. You mean we let them try to kill Richard? I mean we let them think they're succeeding, while we document everything. Then we hand the police a complete case: attempted murder, conspiracy, money laundering, extortion, everything. That's incredibly dangerous. What if something goes wrong? Torres's expression was grim. Elena, something is already going wrong. If we don't stop this Friday night, your husband will be dead by Saturday morning. And after that, Marcus Webb and his people will disappear with millions of dollars and never face justice for any of it. Elena considered the risks. Everything Torres was proposing could go catastrophically wrong. Richard could actually die. She could be discovered and killed herself. And the criminals could escape anyway. But the alternative was worse. What do you need me to do? Over the next 3 days, Elena and Torres worked with the intensity of people preparing for war. They studied building layouts, traffic patterns, security protocols. They tested recording equipment and communication devices. Most importantly, they built a detailed timeline of what they expected to happen Friday night. The Pemberton charity auction was being held at the Palace Hotel, in the same grand ballroom where Elena had attended her first high society function as Richard's wife. The irony wasn't lost on her that this was where everything would end. Richard will arrive alone around 8 p.m., Torres said, reviewing their surveillance notes. He'll make an appearance, bid on a few items, play the part of the grieving widower trying to return to normal life. Marcus and Trevor Webb will be there too, but separately. Marcus is working security for the event. He has a legitimate business that provides bodyguards for high-end functions. Trevor will attend as a guest, probably with some attractive woman to maintain his cover as a successful businessman. Elena studied the hotel blueprints Torres had obtained. Where do you think they'll make their move? Not inside the hotel. Too many witnesses, too many cameras. My guess is they'll wait until Richard leaves, then stage something in the parking garage or on the street. A robbery gone wrong. Or a hit and run. Quick, simple, hard to trace back to them. Elena felt a familiar chill at how casually they discussed murder scenarios. But she'd learned over the past month that survival sometimes required thinking like a predator. How do we stop them, without revealing that we know what's happening? Torres smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. We don't stop them, we redirect them. Friday night arrived with a winter storm that turned the city's streets into rivers of reflected neon. Elena stood in the lobby of the Palace Hotel, wearing an elegant black dress and a carefully crafted disguise that made her look like a different person entirely. Contact lenses had changed her eye color from brown to green, and subtle makeup had altered the shape of her face. Her hair was blonde now, styled in a sophisticated updo that suggested expensive salons and old money. To anyone who looked, she was Veronica Ashford, an art dealer from New York who was in town for the auction. Elena watched through the ballroom's glass doors as Richard moved through the crowd, accepting condolences and making small talk with people who had known them as a couple. He looked older than she remembered, more fragile, and she felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for the man who had tried to have her killed. Marcus Webb was easy to spot, despite his attempts to blend in. He stood near the main entrance, wearing a security earpiece and scanning the crowd with professional attention. His bulk made him stand out among the elegantly dressed socialites, but his positioning gave him clear sightlines to all the Thetes. Trevor Webb was harder to identify at first. Elena finally spotted him near the bar, talking to a striking redhead who laughed at everything he said. Unlike his uncle, Trevor looked perfectly at home among the wealthy attendees. His suit was perfectly tailored, his manner confident and charming. Elena activated the recording device hidden in her evening bag and moved closer to the bar. Of course, the real money is in international shipping, Trevor was saying to the redhead. My business partner has connections throughout Asia and South America. Very lucrative markets if you know how to navigate the regulatory challenges. That sounds fascinating, the redhead replied. Is that why you're here tonight? Business networking? Trevor's smile was predatory. Actually, I'm here to celebrate. We're closing a very big deal tonight. Something that's been in the works for a long time. Elena moved away before she attracted attention, but she'd heard enough. Trevor was confident that tonight would be profitable for him. Confirmation that the plan was moving forward. At 10:30 p.m., as the auction wound down and guests began leaving, Elena positioned herself near the parking garage entrance. Torres was somewhere in the shadows with a van full of surveillance equipment, monitoring multiple frequencies and ready to call for police backup if needed. Richard emerged from the hotel alone, walking with the careful steps of someone who'd had a bit too much to drink. Elena felt her heart rate spike as she watched him head toward the garage. 2 minutes later, Marcus Webb appeared, speaking quietly into his phone. He followed Richard at a distance, staying hidden behind concrete pillars. Elena slipped into the garage through a service entrance Torres had shown her, moving silently through the shadows between parked cars. She could hear footsteps echoing off the concrete walls, Richard's unsteady gait and Marcus's heavier tread. Richard reached his Mercedes and fumbled with his keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door. As he bent to pick up the keys, Marcus Webb stepped out of the shadows behind him. "Mr. Whitmore." Richard spun around, nearly losing his balance. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk about your wife. I told you, I don't know where Alexandra went. She just disappeared." Marcus smiled, and in the harsh fluorescent light of the garage, his expression was terrifying. "That's the problem, Mr. Whitmore. You see, my nephew and I have been thinking about our arrangement, about how much you know about our business activities." Elena pressed herself against a concrete pillar, her phone ready to call 911 if the situation escalated too quickly. "I don't know what you mean," Richard said, but his voice carried the tremor of a man who knew exactly what was being discussed. "The money laundering, Richard. The offshore accounts. The business transactions that have been keeping you afloat for the past 2 years. That was your idea. You said it was perfectly legal, just creative accounting. Nothing about it was legal, and you knew it. You've been an accessory to multiple federal crimes, Richard. The kind of crimes that carry 20-year prison sentences." Elena watched as Richard's face went white. She realized that Torres had been right. Richard hadn't been in control of any of this. He'd been manipulated and controlled just as surely as she had been. "What do you want?" Richard whispered. "We want you to disappear, Richard. Permanently. Just like your wife. You said you didn't kill Alexandra. You said she ran away." Marcus laughed. "Did we? I don't recall saying anything of the sort. I recall saying that your wife wouldn't be a problem anymore, and she is." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Richard staggered backward against his car, and Elena could see him realizing that his wife was dead, or so he believed. "You killed her. We solved your problem, just like you asked us to. And now we're going to solve our problem." Marcus pulled a gun from inside his jacket, but before he could aim it, Elena stepped out of the shadows. "Actually, Marcus, your problem is a little more complicated than you think." Both men spun toward her voice. Richard's face went white as death as he recognized his supposedly murdered wife. "Alexandra?" he whispered.
"Hello, Richard. Miss me?"
Marcus's gun swung toward her, but Elena was ready. She activated the high-powered strobe light Torres had given her, filling the garage with blinding flashes while she dove behind a parked SUV. The sound of gunshots echoed off the concrete walls, but Elena was already moving, using the vehicle as cover while she worked her way toward the garage entrance. "Elena, go." Torres's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Police are 90 seconds out." Elena reached the entrance as she heard Marcus shouting orders to someone, probably Trevor, who must have been waiting nearby. Car engines roared to life, and Elena realized the Webbs were trying to escape. She burst out of the garage to find Torres's van blocking the exit, its lights flashing and horn blaring. Through the windshield, she could see Torres talking rapidly into a radio. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer by the second. Marcus Webb's SUV screeched around the corner, heading straight for Torres's van. For a moment, Elena thought he was going to ram it, but at the last second the criminal spun the wheel and crashed into a fire hydrant instead. Water erupted into the air as Marcus stumbled out of the damaged vehicle, his gun still in his hand, but before he could aim it, 3 police cars converged on the scene, officers shouting commands and drawing their weapons. Elena watched from behind a parked car as Marcus Webb raised his hands in surrender. In the distance she could see more police cars arriving, their lights painting the wet streets in red and blue. It was over. 2 hours later, Elena sat in an interview room at the Northern District Police Station, telling her story to Detective Sarah Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened with the patience of someone who had heard everything before. "So you've been alive this entire time," Detective Morrison said, reviewing her notes. "Living under a false identity while gathering evidence against your husband and his associates." "That's correct. And you did this with the help of Vincent Torres, who has no official law enforcement authority and who has been conducting unauthorized surveillance operations throughout the city." Elena glanced at Torres, who sat beside her, looking unrepentant. "Detective Morrison, if we had come to the police 3 weeks ago with a story about my husband planning to have me killed, what would you have done?" Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Probably told you that we couldn't arrest someone for crimes they hadn't committed yet. And in the meantime, I would have been dead. Richard would have collected my life insurance money, and Marcus Webb would have disappeared with millions of dollars in laundered funds. Speaking of your husband, Mrs. Whitmore, what do you want to happen to him?" Elena had been dreading this question. Richard was being held in a cell downstairs, facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, and accessory to multiple felonies. His life was essentially over. "I want him to get help," she said finally. "I think Richard has been mentally ill for a long time, and the Webbs took advantage of that. He needs treatment, not just punishment." "That's very generous, considering he tried to have you killed." "The man who tried to have me killed wasn't really my husband anymore. He was someone else, someone the Webbs created through years of manipulation and control." Detective Morrison closed her notebook. "Mrs. Whitmore, you and Mr. Torres have handed us one of the most complete criminal cases I've ever seen. The Webb organization was involved in money laundering, murder for hire, extortion, and half a dozen other federal crimes. The evidence you've gathered is going to put a lot of dangerous people in prison for a very long time. What happens now? Now you go home and try to rebuild your life. The woman who disappeared 3 weeks ago can come back from the dead, so to speak." Elena smiled, but she shook her head. "Actually, Detective Morrison, I think Alexandra Whitmore really is dead. Elena Rodriguez, on the other hand, is just getting started." 6 months later, Elena Rodriguez walked through the gallery, showing of her first photography exhibition. The images on the walls told the story of hidden San Francisco, the shadows and secrets that most people never saw. Street corners where deals were made, parking garages where lives were changed, abandoned warehouses where desperate people found refuge. Vincent Torres stood near the entrance, wearing an actual tuxedo instead of his usual leather jacket. He'd used the reward money from the Webb case to start a legitimate private investigation business, specializing in helping people who couldn't get help anywhere else. "Beautiful work," he said, studying a photograph of the warehouse where Elena had first learned to become someone else. "You thinking about making this your full-time career?" "Maybe. I've discovered I have a talent for seeing things other people miss." Speaking of which, Torres handed her a business card. "Woman in Oakland thinks her husband is trying to poison her. Police say there's no evidence. Doctors say she's paranoid. Sounds familiar?" Elena studied the card. "Margaret Chen, 45 time 5501-207. Below the phone number, someone had written, 'Please help. No one believes me.'" "You know," Elena said, slipping the card into her purse, "I think Elena Rodriguez might be very good at this kind of work." As the gallery filled with people admiring her photographs, Elena thought about the path that had brought her here. Alexandra Whitmore had been a victim, someone who lived her life according to other people's expectations and desires. But Elena Rodriguez was something else entirely, a hunter, a protector, someone who understood that sometimes the only way to stop a predator was to become more dangerous than they were. Outside, the fog was rolling in from the Pacific, transforming the city into something mysterious and beautiful. Elena smiled as she watched it through the gallery windows. San Francisco would always be a city of shadows and secrets, but now she was someone who belonged in those shadows. And in a cell in San Quentin, Richard Whitmore sat staring at the wall, trying to remember when his life had stopped being his own. The doctors said he was making progress, that the therapy was helping him understand how completely he'd been manipulated. Sometimes, late at night, he even remembered the man he'd been before Marcus Webb entered his life. He'd written letters to Alexandra to Elena, but she'd never responded. He didn't blame her. Some things, once broken, could never be repaired. But sometimes he allowed himself to hope that somewhere in the city, she was building something new, something better, something that was entirely her own.